Alright, notes number 11, solving a quadratic equation by factoring. Now, quadratic equations are normally expressed in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So since it's an equation, it has that equal sign. So before we were just looking at our quadratic trinomials, which was just the ax squared plus bx plus c, but now we're getting into the equation, so that's why it equals 0. So now it's an equation. And this a cannot equal 0, because if that a value is equal to 0, then we don't have a quadratic, because it would just cross out that whole value. So that's why cannot equal 0. Now if we think that d times e equals 0, well, what do we know about d, or what do we know about e? So just thinking about that. Well, if d and e have to be a number, well, what number times something is going to give you 0? Well, we know like 5 times 4 is 20, but we want to get 0. Well, how are we going to get 0? Well, the only way that we can figure out to get 0 is that either d has to equal 0 or e has to equal 0. So 0 times e is going to give us 0, or d times 0 will give us 0. So either d or e has to equal 0. So we know that one of those two variables has to be 0. So now to solve using that, we're going to think about solving a quadratic equation. We have 4 steps. First thing we got to do is write the equation in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. All right, that's very important. That it has to equal 0. So it has to equal 0. Some of the equations, they're not going to equal 0. We have to set them up so that they do equal 0. So we start with the equation to form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And be sure it's set equal to 0. Step 2 is we factor the left-hand side, assuming that 0 is on the right. So we factor the left. We factor our quadratic trinomial, or just the quadratic expression. So after we factor, then the next thing is we're going to set each factor equal to 0. Just like we said that d is equal to 0, well, that's the first factor. And then we have e is equal to 0, well, that's my second factor. So we can set each factor equal to 0, since something times 0 is going to give us 0. And in the fourth step, we solve factors to determine the roots. The roots are also called our solutions, or the zeros. It's the value of x. So 4 simple steps here that we're going to look at with our 4 examples. So when we look at these 4 examples, now the other thing is labeling A, B, and C. It's going to help us later on. So if we get used to labeling A, B, and the C, when we get to later on, we're already going to know them. Well, a is a number in front of x squared, which is 1. B is in front of x, which is 8. And c is our constant term, which is 15. So what we want here, we want factors of 15 that give us 8. So factors of 15, we have 1 and 15, 3 and 5 to add to give us 8. So that's 3 plus 5. So we can factor this today. We have x plus 3, and we have x plus 5. So we have x plus 3 and we have x plus 5. Now, that's step 2, we just factored it. Step 1, it was equal 0. Step 3 says we set each factor equal to 0. So we do x plus 3 equals 0 and x plus 5 equals 0. Now to solve this first one, we do minus 3. So x equals negative 3. And the second one, minus 5, x equals negative 5. So the answer for number 1, x equals negative 3 or negative 5. So if x is negative 3 or negative 5, it will be a solution to our problem. We can plug these in to check this. We can do x squared plus 8x plus 15. We plug in the negative 3. We check our work, and we will figure out that 0. And if we use our calculator here, so if I just plug these in, so this is going to be negative 3 squared plus 8 times negative 3 plus 15 gives me 0. So I can check them, and if I put negative 5 in also, negative 5 squared plus 8 times negative 5 plus 15, that gives me 0. So that shows me that they are solutions to this quadratic equation. So when we look at question number 2, first step, it is equal to 0, so this is in the correct form. It's equal to 0. So it's in our correct form. So now we want to try to factor. So we want factors of 3 that give us 4. So we're going to have x plus 3, x plus 1, and it equals 0. So we did step 2. We factored the left side. So factors of 3 that give us 4. And then we set each of these equal to 0. So x plus 3 equals 0. X plus 1 equals 0. Minus 3, minus 3, minus 1, and minus 1. So x equals negative 3. X equals negative 1. So we have our solution is x equals negative 1 comma negative 3. And then going back to the a, the b, and the c. A is in front of x squared, so this is my 1. B is in front of x. This is 4. And c is my constant, which is 3. Moving on to number 3. We have x squared plus 6x minus 27 equals 0. So I can label a, b, and c. So a is 1. B is 6, and then C is going to be negative 27. And it equals 0. So now we want factors of negative 27 that give us 6. Well, factors of negative 27, I have 1 and negative 27, negative 1 and positive 27, 3 and negative 9, negative 3 and positive 9. Since I want positive 6, I'm going to use negative 3 and positive 9. So my factors are x minus 3, x plus 9 equals 0. So we factored it, that's step 2. Step 3 says we're going to set each of these equal to 0. So x minus 3 equals 0, x plus 9 equals 0. Now we can solve it. Plus 3 and plus 3, x equals 3. Minus 9 minus 9, x equals negative 9. So the answer for number 3 is x equals 3 or negative 9. And now when we look at number 4, we look at step 1. It says start with the equation to form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. But when we're looking at number 4, it doesn't equal 0, it equals negative 5. Well, that's a problem. It has to equal 0. So what we need to do is we need to get rid of that 5x. Well, the way that we get rid of the 5x is we simply do minus 5x. So we just we subtract it out. But whatever we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other side. Now, if I would write x squared minus 6 minus 5x. Now, when we look at that, that's not in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. So an easier way for me to do this is when I was looking at x squared, I want to put my negative 5x after the x squared. So I want to should have wrote it as x squared minus 5x minus 6 equals 0. So we don't have any like terms, so the 5x isn't going to go with the x squared or the 6. But the negative 5x goes in between the x squared and the minus 6. So it's in standard form, highest exponent to lowest exponent. Now we're looking for factors of 6 that give us negative 5. So factors of negative 6. And now we can fill in a, b, and c also. But our factors of 6, we have negative 1 and 6, 1 and negative 6. Negative 2 and 3, 2 and negative 3. So the ones that are going to give us negative 5, it's not the 2's and the 3's because one's positive and one's negative. It's going to be 1 and negative 6. So we have x plus 1, x minus 6 equals 0. And then we set each of these equal to 0. X plus 1 equals 0. X minus 6 equals 0. Now we subtract 1 from both sides. X equals negative 1. We add 6 to both sides. X equals 6. So our solution for example 4 x equals -1 and 6. And going back to a, b, and c, well, we are going to look at a, b, and c from this part right here. So when it's in standard form, so a, b, and c, it's in standard form, our numbers are right there, the coefficients. So a is 1, b is going to be in front of x, which is -5, and c is our constant, which is -6. Now, if you have mastered the factoring part, solving these equations by factoring, just one extra step. So, and that's how we solve these equations by factoring.